February 12, 1943. Rostov-on-Don. The snow fell in wet, heavy sheets, turning the rubble-strewn streets into veins of gray mud. The smell of cordite and disease clung to the air like an invisible fog. From the ruins of a burned-out cabaret, a faded sign still flickered, Anna's Night of Pleasure. Beneath it, two German soldiers stumbled out into the dawn, their laughter drowned by the distant thunder of artillery. By nightfall, one of them would be dead, not from bullets, but from something far more insidious. Wehrmacht Field Report, 17th Army, February 1943. The soldier's name was Walter Heinisch, a veteran of the Viking Division. He had survived Stalingrad's outskirts, frostbite, and partisan ambushes. Yet as his convoy rolled out of Rostov, his hands trembled uncontrollably. He told his comrades it was the cold. But in the dim light of the ambulance, the medic's face betrayed no illusion. "It's not the cold," the medic muttered. "It's an infection, venereal." Bundesarchiv, Medical Corps Diary, 1943. That winter, the German army wasn't just losing ground. It was losing its soldiers to disease. Rostov, once a jewel of the Don, had become a brothel of desperation. The city was awash with hunger, fear, and survival. And amidst the chaos, a silent epidemic spread faster than any retreating army. Posters screamed warnings in crude block letters. "Soldier, beware. Deadly Asiatic venereal diseases." The propaganda was meant to scare. It didn't work. By February, 43% of frontline troops in the southern sector were infected. German Army Medical Command Bulletin, March 1943. In a war of tanks and steel, the Wehrmacht had never prepared for this kind of enemy. Commanders ordered chemical disinfectants. Field hospitals ran makeshift clinics behind barns and railway stations. Doctors, once surgeons of battlefield trauma, now became reluctant specialists in the body's hidden rot. And every diagnosis carried shame. A man wounded in the line of duty was a hero. A man infected by pleasure was marked, dishonored, unfit, expendable. Army Health Regulations Directive, 1942. But beneath this humiliation lay something darker. As the infection spread, rumors whispered through the ranks that it had not been an accident. That the women, local civilians, dancers, nurses, had been weaponized. A biological sabotage campaign. The NKVD, some said, had released infected prostitutes behind enemy lines to weaken the invaders. Counterintelligence Report, Army Group South, 1943. The truth was murkier. The Soviet intelligence archives, long after the war, revealed a chilling document. It outlined a covert plan titled Operation Baryshnya, a counterinfiltration initiative aimed at disrupting German manpower through psychological and biological compromise. Whether it was ever enacted in full remains debated. But for the soldiers in Rostov, the result felt unmistakably deliberate. Soviet NKVD Memorandum, 1942, declassified 1995. Heinisch's illness became a metaphor for the entire front. A body rotting from within, poisoned not by bullets, but by its own vices. Soldiers joked bitterly that the Eastern Front kills twice, once by gunfire, once by women. Letter intercepted by Feldpost, February 1943, yet the laughter was hollow. Commanders noticed declining morale, erratic behavior, and breakdowns of discipline. One officer reported that platoons rot faster than rations. 17th Army Discipline Report, 1943, the Medical Corps scrambled. From Kharkov to the Kuban bridgehead, mobile hygiene units were established. They operated like grim traveling circuses, setting up tents, examining entire companies, and injecting them with mercury-based treatments that burned like fire. Soldiers called it the sting of shame. German Army Hygiene Regulations, 1943. The cure was often worse than the disease. Many went blind. Others suffered permanent nerve damage. The irony was bitter. These same men had been trained to fight for racial purity, yet were now ravaged by a disease they were taught belonged to the degenerate East. Propaganda Ministry Memo, 1942. The contradiction was unbearable. Some commanders began quietly covering up the statistics, falsifying reports to maintain morale. Others went further, ordering field marriages with clean women or segregating infected troops in secret compounds. The Reich's obsession with control now extended to the most intimate battlefield, the human body. The soldiers caught between guilt and decay became walking secrets. Heinrich, delirious with fever, was evacuated toward Taganrog. Witnesses recalled him muttering, "Tell them it was love, not treason." He died 3 days later. His medical record was stamped typhus. Officially, venereal disease deaths were never logged. German Army Health Office Archive, File 712b. Behind the numbers, the machinery of denial ground on. Berlin demanded improved conduct. Commanders blamed local women. Police rounded them up en masse. Thousands were sent to so-called health camps for testing and re-education. The line between medicine and persecution blurred. In occupied territories from Rostov to Odessa, entire districts were quarantined under suspicion of harboring biological saboteurs. Reich Health Office Order No. 94, 1943. By spring, the epidemic had reached the level of a crisis. Field units reported chronic shortages of medicine, disinfectants, and even soap. Engineers from IG Farben, better known for producing Zyklon B, were commissioned to synthesize faster-acting sulfa drugs. The irony of scientists designing both gas and cure was not lost on those who knew. IG Farben Production Report, April 1943. At the same time, German propaganda launched a campaign to sanitize the soldier's image. Pamphlets depicted the healthy Aryan warrior beside the diseased Asiatic temptress. Medical lectures were forced upon regiments, illustrated with grotesque slides of infected tissue. Fear became policy. Nazi Public Health Education Program, 1943. And yet, in the chaos, small acts of humanity persisted. Nurses, some volunteers, others prisoners, risked punishment to smuggle in penicillin from black markets, a drug still scarce in Europe. Chemists in Krakow and Vienna began clandestine experiments, years ahead of official sanction. These quiet rebels of medicine saved hundreds, perhaps thousands. Vienna Medical Underground Memoirs, 1946. Still, the war machine demanded silence. Every sick soldier was a weakness. Every weakness is a liability. In March 1943, the Wehrmacht issued a confidential order. All venereal disease cases were to be reported directly to Berlin's Central Medical Office under sealed correspondence. Division commanders were forbidden to mention them in field briefings. The result was chilling efficiency and total secrecy. Wehrmacht Directive 214, c. 1943. By the time the snows melted, Rostov's ruins were blooming with wildflowers and disease alike. Beneath the rubble of Anna's cabaret, investigators later found hundreds of discarded syringes, medical vials, and torn ration papers. Whether it had been a house of pleasure or a front for espionage, no one could say. What remained was a mystery carved in ruin. How one night of passion had birthed a crisis that command dared not name. The files would vanish after the war, burned, sealed, redacted. But among survivors, a single phrase endured, whispered like a confession. It began with love and ended with a cover-up. The infection had spread far beyond bodies. It had infected the truth itself. And as Berlin tightened its grip on secrecy, another front was opening, not against the Soviets, but against science, conscience, and the soldiers' own humanity. What happened next would reveal just how far the Reich would go to bury its shame. By April 1943, the Reich's medical corps faced an invisible war, one waged in laboratories, field clinics, and in the silence of sealed reports. The official term was biologist Gefahrdungskontrolle, biological hazard control, but among soldiers, it was known by a simpler, darker name, the Shame War. Wehrmacht Medical Command Circular, April 1943. The hidden weapon that threatened to cripple entire battalions wasn't a Soviet tank or bomber. It was a microscopic invader, Treponema pallidum, the syphilis spirochete, and its less famous accomplice, Neisseria gonorrhoeae. They moved silently through the ranks, crossing borders more easily than any army. Unlike artillery, they didn't just wound, they humiliated. And humiliation was something the Nazi command refused to document. Reich Health Office Laboratory Log, 1943. Berlin's answer came not from generals, but from doctors and engineers, men like Dr. Ernst Grawitz, chief of the SS Medical Services, and Dr. Gerhard Rose of the Luftwaffe Hygiene Institute. These men believed in conquering disease as if it were an enemy army. The laboratories at Dachau and Ravensbrück became their proving grounds. Inmates were infected under controlled conditions to test new treatments: mercury salves, arsenic compounds, and crude penicillin analogs. Nuremberg Medical Trial Records, 1946. On paper, the goal was noble: to protect the soldiers' health. In practice, it was a campaign of cruelty. The Reich's biological defense blurred into biological warfare. What began as a fight against venereal infection mutated into human experimentation, an echo of the same moral decay it claimed to cure. Allied War Crimes Medical Evidence File 12, 1947. But on the front lines, doctors had neither time nor ideology. They had only desperation. Field medical units operated out of barns, train cars, and sometimes the back of trucks. There, amid the stink of rot and disinfectant, men were injected, scrubbed, burned, and patched up to fight another day. Medical Company Log, 1st Panzer Army. May 1943. Among them was Dr. Hans Tietze, a young Viennese physician attached to the 17th Army. In a letter home, he described working 36-hour shifts under lantern light, his hands trembling from exhaustion. They come to me red-faced with shame, whispering their ailments. I treat them, knowing most will return infected again. We cure nothing. We delay collapse. Private Correspondence, Vienna Archives, 1944. Tietze's unit recorded 512 cases in a single month. The epidemic was no longer a moral failure. It was a logistical catastrophe. Every infected soldier meant a rifle missing from the line. The front weakened not by Soviet shells, but by disease. Commanders began to notice patterns. Whole platoons rendered useless after occupying certain towns. The term infectious zones entered the military lexicon. Rostov, Taganrog, and Oral were marked red on classified maps. Army Health Directorate Map, 1943. Still, the Wehrmacht's propaganda machine refused to show weakness. Films were produced, sanitized reels depicting soldiers lining up for medical checkups, nurses smiling under bright lamps, and cheerful slogans promising health is honor. But behind those reels, thousands of soldiers suffered in secret, subjected to what one medic called chemical crucifixion, a regimen of mercury injections that left men vomiting and half-blind. Wehrmacht Health Film Archive, Propaganda Ministry, 1943. Meanwhile, the enemy's tactics evolved. Soviet counterintelligence reports later confirmed that Operation Baryshnya, rumored months earlier, had indeed deployed select operatives trained in infiltration and social contact. These women, often war widows or captured civilians coerced by the NKVD, were intentionally infected and released into German-occupied cities. Soviet Counterintelligence Summary, 1944, declassified. Their mission: spread confusion, fear, and disease among the occupiers. A captured NKVD courier later confessed under interrogation. They told us infection was a weapon like any other. We called it the invisible bullet. German Interrogation Report, 1943. The Germans were horrified, not only by the moral implications but also by the strategic genius. If every act of pleasure carried death, morale would disintegrate. Panic spread faster than the pathogens themselves. Troops began refusing leave, fearing contact. Commanders feared collapse, not from the enemy's guns, but from their soldiers' loneliness. Psychological Operations Division Brief, 1943. In response, the Reich turned to industry. Pharmaceutical firms, IG Farben, Bayer, and Hoechst, were ordered to mass-produce sulfonamide derivatives under military contract. The result was Prontosil rubrum, a bright red antibacterial dye that promised salvation in a vial. The compound was discovered by chemist Gerhard Domach, who had won the Nobel Prize for his earlier work. Now, his creation was repurposed for war. IG Farben Production Log, Frankfurt, 1943. Factories ran day and night. Workers, many of them women and forced laborers, filled glass ampoules, packed medical kits, and stamped every crate with the Black Eagle insignia. Berlin Industrial Records, 1943. Each batch was destined for a frontline depot marked hygiene priority. For the engineers, it was just another logistics miracle. For the soldiers, it was fragile hope. Technically, Prontosil worked, but slowly, and not always well. Soldiers still suffered recurring infections. In field diaries, men described the treatment side effects: hallucinations, high fevers, red urine, and burning veins. Yet they lined up for injections willingly. "Better red urine than a red face and death," one wrote. Feldpost correspondence, June 1943. By summer, the epidemic's tide began to shift. Mobile laboratories fitted into armored trucks, called Sanitätskraftwagen 43, rolled along the front, conducting rapid diagnosis using microscopes powered by hand cranks. Technicians, trained in Munich and Leipzig, performed over 40,000 tests in a month. Technical Manual TM9 to 294, 1943. It was industrial medicine, efficient and ruthless. And still, Berlin's obsession with secrecy persisted. The OKH, Army High Command, established Code Directive 72B, ordering that disease casualties shall be recorded as fatigue or unspecified fever in all public dispatches. OKH Directive, August 1943. This deception extended even to Hitler's personal briefings. When presented with a chart showing a drop in manpower, he reportedly erupted. "You mean to tell me my soldiers are dying in bed instead of battle?" Führer Conference Transcript, 1943, but the cover-up couldn't last. On July 23, during the advance toward the Kuban bridgehead, a division collapsed mid-operation, its ranks thinned not by enemy fire, but by illness. Commanders described men fainting at their posts, trembling uncontrollably, fevered, and delirious. The cause, officially, heat exhaustion. The reality, late-stage syphilis. Army Group South After Action Report, 1943. That collapse forced Berlin's hand. Dr. Grawitz authorized an emergency medical conference at Rassenburg. There, in the dark wood-paneled war rooms of Hitler's headquarters, military doctors presented findings under armed guard. Charts, microscopy slides, mortality tables. One colonel summed it up grimly. "My Führer, our men are falling to a weapon we cannot shoot." Conference minutes, July 1943. The meeting ended with silence. But within weeks, new orders were issued. The Army would launch a full-scale medical offensive, mass screening, mandatory prophylaxis stations, and, most secretly of all, controlled trials of captured Soviet remedies. Rumors circulated that Red Army doctors used herbal serums extracted from Caucasian plants with surprising results. Samples were seized and sent to Berlin for testing. Bureau of Medical Research Report, 1943. This was no longer a medical emergency. It had become a shadow war between scientists, fought under the banners of both armies. German intelligence intercepted Soviet communications hinting at laboratory operations in the Caucasus Mountains, research outposts disguised as field hospitals, where doctors experimented with biological resistance. Abwehr signal intercept, 1943. In that same region, amid smoke and blood, Dr. Tietze's field units stumbled upon a makeshift Soviet clinic hidden in a monastery cellar. Inside, they found glass flasks, microscopes, and handwritten notebooks. One entry read simply, "They think we infect them. We only survive." Recovered Soviet Medical Journal, 1943. That note haunted him. In his final report, Tietze wrote, "The disease has no side. It consumes all who fight it." His words were censored, and his name was erased from later records. Army Medical Corps Archive, 1945. By autumn, the German command declared the crisis contained. But containment didn't mean eradication, it meant concealment. Records were purged, cases reclassified, and witnesses reassigned. Officially, the epidemic never happened. But beneath the surface, the truth festered. Reich Chancellery Order, December 1943. For those who lived through it, the scars were more than physical. Shame had become a contagion of its own, spreading through silence and fear. And when the war finally turned against Germany, that silence would become its last disease, a sickness of denial. The truth would stay buried for decades. But as the Reich's foundations began to crumble in 1944, the infection that began in one night of pleasure had metastasized into something far deadlier, a war for control over truth itself. Spring, 1944. Across the ruins of Eastern Europe, the German army bled from 1,000 unseen wounds. Not all of them were caused by bullets. Rostov, Orel, and Kharkov, each city reclaimed by the Soviets, left behind hospitals filled with the forgotten casualties of the shame war. Officially, they were listed as non-combat ailments. In reality, they were the human aftermath of one of the Reich's deepest scandals. Wehrmacht Medical Directorate Monthly Report, April 1944, the secret epidemic had not only weakened divisions, it had undermined the very myth of German invincibility. Morale faltered. Men who had once stormed cities now marched with heads bowed, haunted by symptoms that medicine could not fully cure and dared not acknowledge. Venereal disease was no longer merely a medical issue. It had become a moral infection in the Reich's bloodstream. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, 1946. In field reports from the retreat through Ukraine, officers described entire units that functioned like ghosts. They move without discipline, laugh at orders, and mock hygiene lectures, wrote one commander. They no longer fear death, only ridicule. Army Group South Field Report, May 1944, for the Nazis, who had built their empire on ideals of racial purity and physical perfection. This hidden plague was existential heresy. Berlin's response grew increasingly paranoid. The Reich Health Office demanded total secrecy, ordering that all infected soldiers be transferred to sanitary isolation camps, often in remote forest clearings or behind railway depots. The official justification was treatment. The reality was containment. Reich Health Decree 112, F. 1944. These were not hospitals. They were quiet prisons. Nurses worked behind barbed wire. Guards burned patient logs weekly. Men who entered seldom returned to the front. Some were reassigned to labor units. Others simply vanished from rosters. Rumors spread of medical disappearances, a phrase whispered with more fear than any Allied bomb raid. Testimony, Nuremberg Medical Trials, 1946. But even in this darkness, acts of defiance flickered. At one camp outside Krakow, two German nurses, Erika Muller and Clara Hoffmann, smuggled genuine penicillin obtained from black market traders in Sweden. Working in secret at night, they diluted the powder into saline and injected it into fevered veins. Within weeks, infection rates in their ward dropped dramatically. They saved dozens before being discovered and court-martialed. Their fate remains unknown. Bundesarchiv Testimony, 1947. Their courage contrasted the cynicism in Berlin. By mid-1944, the Reich's scientific establishment had learned a chilling lesson. Disease could be as potent a weapon as any panzer division. Within the SS Medical Directorate, files began circulating under a new classification, Einsatz Biologischer Abwehr, Biological Deployment Studies. The cover story, Defensive Research. The intent, the capacity to infect. SS Medical Bureau Memorandum, July 1944. Inside those files were analyses of how sexually transmitted infections had crippled entire corps without firing a shot. Grauwitz's surviving assistants proposed adapting the principle, deliberately targeting enemy troops with disease vectors. Hitler never signed the plan, but its presence in the archives reveals the regime's final descent into desperation. Captured SS medical documents, 1945. Meanwhile, on the front, the hidden epidemic continued to erode the human foundation of the Wehrmacht. Engineers complained that maintenance crews, often pulled from infected reserves, could no longer keep panzer engines running. Airfield medics noted pilots grounded by neurological tremors from untreated syphilis. Radio operators developed blindness and nerve damage from mercury therapy. Luftwaffe Medical Report, September 1944. The disease's effects stretched beyond the battlefield. Civilians in occupied zones bore the aftermath, women subjected to forced testing, mass detentions, and public humiliation. Soviet medical teams arriving after liberation found warehouses filled with confiscated patient cards and thousands of vials labeled. Experiment 12B, Rostov sample. Soviet War Crimes Investigation File. 1945. Many were still sealed, as if waiting for someone to confess. When Germany began to collapse, the truth began to leak from its own ruins. Doctors burned their records, but the paper smoke told its own story. Soldiers surrendered to Allied forces with strange lesions and scarred skin, some blind, some crippled by tremors. Allied physicians who examined them were horrified. Their bodies tell of treatment more punishing than the disease itself, wrote Captain Harold F. Langley, U.S. Army Medical Corps. Allied Medical Debrief. 1945. As the Reich fell, so too did its secrecy. The Allied medical investigators, combing through shattered hospitals and laboratories, uncovered what one report called a war within the war. The files from Rassenburg and Dachau revealed the experiments, the field directives, and the numbers. Over 400,000 recorded infections among German troops between 1941 and 1944. Allied Combined Intelligence Report. 1946. Yet not one of those cases had ever been made public during the conflict. The entire epidemic had been hidden behind euphemisms, fatigue, fever, and disciplinary reallocation. The cover-up had been total and effective. In the post-war years, few Germans spoke of it. Medical officers swore oaths of silence to preserve honor. Only fragments survived. A field diary here, a requisition slip there, a faded hospital photograph. It took decades before historians began to piece together the scale of the deception. West German Historical Review, 1967. The long-term damage was profound. Untreated infections led to sterility, madness, and death among thousands of veterans. Families whispered of mysterious ailments long after the war. In the East, Soviet doctors reported parallel crises among both civilians and liberated POWs, where infection had spread in all directions. The weapon, whether deliberate or accidental, had achieved its cruel equilibrium, both sides poisoned by proximity. Red Army Medical Review, 1946. Yet from that devastation, modern military medicine was born. The Allies, shocked by what they uncovered, resolved to never again allow disease to thrive in secrecy. American engineers and doctors studying captured German reports saw the urgent need for standardized prophylaxis, better antibiotics, and open data sharing. By 1945, penicillin production had risen from mere kilograms to over 650 billion units annually. U.S. Army Medical Department Report, 1945. Factories in Detroit and London that once forged tank armor now produced vials of salvation. The lessons of the Eastern Front were clear: logistics was life. A healthy soldier was the true weapon of war. The U.S. Army established the Preventive Medicine Service, and NATO later enshrined those principles in Cold War doctrine. Disease became an enemy to be confronted openly, not hidden in shame. NATO Medical Doctrine Review, 1952. The German experience, however, remained buried in silence. For decades, official war histories omitted any mention of the 1943 epidemic. Only in the 1980s did declassified Soviet and Allied documents expose the full picture, an outbreak so severe it rivaled combat losses in some divisions. What had begun as a scandal of lust and secrecy had evolved into a mirror of totalitarian decay, the regime's attempt to control even nature itself. European Journal of Military History, 1984, and at the heart of it all, the ghost of Rostov remained, a single night of pleasure that sparked a contagion of denial. Historians visiting the ruins of Aina's Cabaret in the 1990s found fragments of its tiled floor and the scorched outline of a dance hall stage. Local records confirmed the building had been requisitioned as a hygienic inspection post in early 1943. In its cellar, archaeologists unearthed a rusted medical tag reading, Patient W. Heinisch, Case 42-17. Rostov Municipal Archive. 1992. That fragment became emblematic of the entire tragedy. A soldier reduced to a case number. A disease treated as treason. A war that infected its own soul. When Allied medical officers compiled their final report in 1946, they concluded with words that could have served as an epitaph for the entire conflict. The greatest danger to any army is not what the enemy brings, but what it hides from itself. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. 1946. In the decades that followed, that lesson echoed through Korea, Vietnam, and the Persian Gulf. Portable antibiotics, mobile field hospitals, and rapid response vaccination units all traced their lineage to the horrors of the Eastern Front. Even modern doctrines of biological warfare containment owe their genesis to that grim experiment in secrecy and shame. The war against infection continues long after the guns have fallen silent. Its battlefield is the body. Its victory, survival through truth. The ghosts of Rostov remind us that every cover-up breeds another crisis, every lie another wound. And as the cold wind still sweeps across the ruins of the Don, one can almost hear the echo of a soldier's last words, half confession, half prayer. Tell them it was love, not treason. Field Diary Fragment. 1943, because in the end, it wasn't the night of pleasure that doomed them, it was the morning after, when the truth became more dangerous than the disease itself.